We ask, who has had extremely distressing paranormal activity in their homes? What is your story? The earliest memory I have is an experience with an apparition. Based on what I know, I was no more than 3 years old when I saw it. Parents did not believe me, always had some explanation for me. We moved houses and tiny things would happen here and there, but once again, my parents have always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. There was a full-body apparition that both my brother and I saw as it walked past the doorway while we were home alone. Fast forward to getting married and moving into an old apartment, things start to heat up a little bit. Bins would get flipped over and the contents dumped onto the floor. Things would slide off the back of our vanity, about 18 inches deep, and fly 3 feet to hit the footboard of our bed. Not gently. More activity than I've experienced before, but still not a lot. We moved into an almost brand new apartment, and while 1 or 2 things happened, things calmed down significantly. Then, we moved in with my in-laws while my husband went to school. Cue the real events. The house would go through periods of high activity, particularly centered around me. My husband would hear me calling him from another room. I would not be calling him. He would see me pass by the bottom of the stairs as he was coming down and would follow me around the corner into the far room, only to dead end with the room completely empty. I came in from the chicken coop to him upset because I'd been calling him from all over the house. I'd been outside the whole time. It would make one of the dogs go feral, barking and snarling at nothing. I would have small, soft items thrown at me. I would hear clapping and walking around the house, and the dogs would go looking for what made the noise. Here's the main story. My husband was working nights and I was home alone on the farm while the in-laws were out of state on a trip. One of the dogs goes into an episode, staring at nothing in the middle of the living room, losing it. Rabid dog. I can't calm her down. Usually, a light touch on the back will snap her out of it, but I could not call her out of this time. I finally got to my room to take a breather, and I hear her stop. Maybe 15 minutes later, she's at it again. I can't describe how terrifying it is to see her like this. Like I said, feral. I go halfway up the stairs, and I'm talking to her through the banister, finally getting her to come over to me and stop barking. She keeps looking next to me at the top of the stairs. Then a huge slam on the baby gate there happens, rattling the gate and the banister. I ignore it because I've heard that's the best thing to do when something right next to you. The dog barks, but I get her stopped again. Then, right in my line of sight, I see a pin slide forcefully off the table, flying multiple feet before hitting the ground. The dog immediately runs to attack and goes into another fit looking at something next to the table. I start to lose it. Immediately go back downstairs to my bedroom. I sat on my bed next to my cat napping there. He stands up and comes to me since I'm upset and crying. I hear the dog move back to barking in the living room, closer to my room. A minute later, my cat turns to look at the doorway. His back raises, ears pinned back, and his hair stands up on end, looking straight at that doorway. I ran out of the house at that point. That was the worst it ever got. I have lots of other little stories, though. I just got moved into a brand new house and, knock on wood, nothing yet. I refuse to talk about paranormal activity aloud in any home I stay in, and I think subconsciously I push myself to only move into new construction for fear of steering anything in an existing house up. With what I know about the experiences through my life, compared to where I was staying, I've kind of begun to think I might be the poltergeist. A new construction home was the only place I felt safe moving into, so while my story isn't to the level of a horror movie, I'm happy to be out of old houses and apartments. When my son was 3, he started having dreams and visions of people coming out of holes and dancing in his room. He said they were trying to tell him something. He also said he would wake up and see faces in the dark and they were screaming at him. There were many nights when his screaming would wake me up and I would run into his room. It honestly sounded like he was being attacked. One night in his room, he was telling me about one of his experiences. I saw a streak of white light move up over his face. Another time, I ran into his room. He was on his knees looking around the room. I did not say anything and just continued to watch him in the dark. This went on for about 15 minutes, and finally, he looked at me and he said one word, Manya. It was his name for whatever spirit he was seeing. Another time on the baby monitor, and we heard a loud male voice say, Stop that! We happened to know a mother and daughter physics team and enlisted their help. They tuned in and both said they saw an evil old man spirit from the 40s who brought in other souls to make mischief. He also smoked a cigar. We often smelled cigar smoke in our hallway outside my son's bedroom. They tried cleaning the house remotely. They live in another city. We thought it was all good until one evening we were walking into our dining room to sit down, when my son went flying towards the table. He started crying and said that someone pushed him from behind. We kept our son in our room that night, and my wife and I both heard what sounded like an old man making gagging noises from my other son's room. He was 11 months old. Our friends put together a whole team, and they came and cleaned the house. It was quite a process, and our neighbors probably thought we were real weirdos, but they got the job done. We haven't had any issues in 10 years. It was really scary. My cousins lived in a house around the block from us, but I hated going there. I was a kid but never felt comfortable in their house. It was a bad or weird vibe or something, so we always played outside. When they moved into their new home, it wasn't much better, but not as bad as their old place, however. I never went into their basement alone. Oh my gosh, even just typing this memory out is giving me goosebumps. I remember I had to use their washroom, but for some reason, I went into their basement washroom for the first time, and the minute I closed the door, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I refused to look in the mirror. Something told me not to, so I shut my eyes, turned around, and run out without even using the toilet. That's when I said I would never go into their basement alone. I then started hearing stories from my cousins and their grandfather. One day, he was home cooking but heard the kids playing video games in the basement. When the food was ready, he called the kids and, getting annoyed that they didn't come, he went downstairs to tell them to come on, but no one was even down there. The TV wasn't even on and he was home alone in the house. My cousin also had stuff happen to them. The sink faucet turning on when they were in the shower, bedroom doorknobs rattling in the middle of the night. All of them slept with the doors locked as if doors will stop ghosts, but whatever will make you feel safe, I guess. And my cousin hung her rosary on the inside of her doorknob, but when she awoke, the cross part was broken off onto the floor. I am so creeped out now. Anyways, it turned out that before they left their old house, my older cousin looked out the window that night before and saw an apparition sitting on the hood of their car. She blinked because she thought it was her eyes playing tricks on her, and it was still there. She then did a long blink, opening her eyes. It was gone. They are convinced that the apparition followed them to their new house because all the stuff that happened at their old home started happening at their new home. They lived in that house for 20 years and they said they, quote, got used to it. This happened when I was 11 and visiting a lighthouse in Michigan that was supposedly haunted by a boy. My parents wanted to take a tour with the tour guide, but I wanted to play outside considering we've been touring various sites in the Upper Peninsula that day. No one was around, so my parents ended up letting me play outside the lighthouse while they took a quick look. As I played outside, a beat-up old ball rolled to my feet. I bent over to pick it up, and as I stood back up, I saw a boy standing next to the edge of the lighthouse looking at me. I assumed the ball was his, so I tossed it over to him and he wandered away. I didn't even think about it, but when my parents were done with the tour, they asked what I did. I told them something along the lines of, I was just wandering around, and I helped this kid get his ball back. The tour guide was with my parents, and when I mentioned the kid, he looked startled because, as I mentioned earlier, there was no other one at the lighthouse, only 3 cars. My parents' car, the tour guide's car, and the car belonging to the person at the front desk. The tour guide asked me to take a look at the picture in the lighthouse. I know this sounds super cliche, but when he showed me the picture, It was the picture of the same boy with the same beat up ball. That kid died at that lighthouse. On a side note, we checked around and there was no boy there no more. So, you might be asking me, why was this creepy? Especially considering what the boy never scared me or tried to scare me. What creeps me out is that I touched that ball. When it comes to ghost stories, most people only report a ghost, not other objects. Assuming that was a ghost with his ball, what the heck did I touch? Also, it felt solid like a real ball. If it was a ghost ball, then how the heck do you explain what I touched? This still bothers me to this day. My childhood was notoriously haunted. We moved into the house when I was around 6 and my brother was 5. It started slowly with him and me seeing weird things at night and having constant nightmares. Things would go missing only to return a few days later. We would constantly hear people talking, footsteps and doors slamming when no one was around. Over the years, it started to escalate and there were a lot of stories, so I have included a few. One parent was in their bedroom during a party when they heard a child running on the door straight to their walk-in closet, which creaked shut. She assumed it was me or my brother and went to open up the door. When she did, some of the t-shirts that were hung close to the door were swaying back and forth. Peeking out from behind them was a little girl she did not know. The little girl vanished before her eyes. I was home alone waiting for my boyfriend to come over. I heard him call my name, so I came out to my bedroom and headed towards the front door. When I came to the stairs that separated my room from the front door, I saw this thing. It almost resembled a person, pitch black, crawling up the stairs. It crackled its neck to look up at me and I ran. I called my boyfriend and he wasn't even there yet. I hid in my room until he came. The last one I'll put is after my family moved out, we rented it for a while. The tenant complained of similar things that we experienced in our first few months there. He went out of town and left his dog in the garage. His friend came to check on it and the dog was missing. He later found the dog, who was fine, just scared, locked in the crawl space that was completely separate from the garage and 2 closed doors away from where the dog was. The crawl space was the worst place in the house for negative activity. My family and I used to live in a house which we thankfully moved out of. It was a small school before the owners bought it and redid it. We were renting. My mom, sister, and I all heard our names being whispered in the passage by my mom's bedroom. My mom would often see a little child peeking around the corner at her, and one day, we had people over for a bray, and we were all in the kitchen. These people are heavily religious, and did not believe in anything paranormal. While we were all sitting around chatting, my sister's Bluetooth speaker that has like a radio setting tuned on, out of nowhere, the volume completely up. The speaker was on the counter where we could all see it and nobody was near it. Then, one of our kitchen cupboards opened and closed on its own. They did not come back to our house for a long time after that. One night, my stepdad had turned the heater off and then switched off the plug off the wall before he went to bed. But when he came through into the lounge the next morning, the heater was on again. He's the type of guy to just brush anything paranormal off and come up with a logical explanation, but he got extra spooked when he was running a bath one night, and he only had the hot tap on. He left the bathroom for 2 seconds, and when he came back, the hot tap had been turned off and the cold tap was on. Finally, my weirdest experience there was when I was in the kitchen making food. I turned my back to put something in the microwave and I heard a little knock sound. When I turned to look, one of our kitchen utensils that had previously been on a hook above the counter was sitting on the counter itself. My sister was at school and my mom was in her bedroom on the opposite side of the house. I later befriended an owner's son and he told us that the neighbors they had when they still lived in that house, he was in grade 4, used to come over for meetings all the time and were genuinely very friendly with the family. He started having horrific nightmares and seeing things in his bedroom that caused him to move to his brother's room or his parents' room at night. Turns out, the neighbors that came over all the time were Satanists. The family had a priest come and bless the house twice, and he stopped seeing things, but the nightmares never stopped, and he still gets them now in his early 20s. All my life we'd, quote, had weird experiences like mirrors coming flying off the wall, hearing and seeing things, and just generally unexplainable occurrences. My best waking up in the middle of the night, thinking that my cousin, who I was staying with at the time, had come into my room and was standing by my bed looking at me. I asked him what he wanted, and when he did not answer, I looked closer and realized that it wasn't my cousin. I ended up just saying, sorry, but I'm too tired for this and I have an exam tomorrow. I turned over and went back to sleep. I've been a witness to many strange occurrences in our house over the years, many of which happened to my very skeptical friends as well. We cannot explain this. The strange occurrences mainly center around my father and sister, while my mother and me, thankfully, have only been peripheral witnesses. Number 1. When I was around 7 years old, my sister and our babysitter were watching TV when the blood completely drained from my sister's face. She was 11, and she tried to scream, but nothing is coming out. She then says she saw a small, hairy man walking through the living room right in front of us. She would not stop crying. My mother thought she was making it up, but my father was eerily quiet. Number 2. When I was about 14, my father was screaming at me to leave our glass sliding door alone. Apparently, I was violently pulling at it, screaming at him to open it. I wasn't at home at the time. Number 3. My best friend came to visit me, and this being South Africa, was waiting at the security gate of our house to let him in. He was calling my name and I was on the toilet. We both hear my dad say, "He's on the toilet, he'll be right there." My blood froze. My father wasn't home. We have no idea what to make of it. Number 4. While another friend, the biggest skeptic I'd say, was sleeping over, I and my sister were discussing my friend's girlfriend at the time. It was the middle of evening, not too late, and we were sitting in my sister's room. Something was violently throwing the chairs around in the kitchen. The sound was clear as day. Thinking it was a burglar, we locked the doors and pressed the alarm button. When the security guys arrive, all the doors are locked and there's nothing missing in the kitchen. That was truly frightening. Number 5. The whole family has heard a woman laughing and knocks on the door. The TV switches on by itself and volume increases or decreases on multiple televisions. Lights come on and off, etc. We hear whispering at night, mostly indistinct but sometimes referencing us. Psst, then followed our name. This was a weekly occurrence. Number 6. My father saw a small humanoid running up our stairs right around the time my sister saw the thing in our living room. He has also seen a woman walking around the house multiple times. This happened about 3 years ago. My cousin was around 8 years old and went inside the house to get a swimming towel. She starts screaming and runs out of the house, face white as a sheet. She says there was a badly burnt child in my sister's room smiling at her. She was truly shaken and struck by her story. She doesn't like to come visit anymore. These are just some of the weird stuff that happened in that house. And yes, my family is still living there. My father is an extremely quiet guy, to the point of it being painful and not one to suffer fools, which makes me even more uneasy about all of this. We're not particularly religious or believers in the paranormal, but enough weird shit has happened to make me question this reality. My newlywed husband and I moved into our first home. It was really old and run down, with good bones, but had sat empty for several years. We learned after moving in that the previous owner, an elderly lady, Mary, had been moved into an old folks' home due to the dementia and then recently died. Someone had left her funeral pamphlet in our letterbox and her funeral was at the church next to our house. We understand that she had lived there her whole life and never married or had children. The house was opposite a small water hole. I'm not sure how to describe it. The activity started mild when we moved in. We could hear footsteps like someone running on timber floorboards at all hours of the night. At first, we laughed it off. Within 2 weeks, we were joking about our ghost, and my mother bought me sage to cleanse the house. She put it on my bed, but it disappeared. It reappeared later in a cupboard in an unusual room in the house, with It was a very old photograph of a little girl in a broad hat in front of our home. Creepy, but we were unfazed. We are atheists and did not bother with this sage. One night, the footsteps intensified. We could hear it outside our open bedroom door. I looked up to see an apparition of what looked like a boy who was in swimming trunks. I screamed. I was so terrified. The next day we cleansed the house with sage and the activity stopped. I did some research later and found a news story about a boy who drowned in the water hole opposite of the house who was the same age as Mary. Maybe they were friends. Everything was normal again until we renovated the home. The footsteps were back and they were actively intensified. Objects would slide off the tabletops and crash into the wall. Small pieces of furniture would be knocked over before our eyes. My baby toddler would scream at something which we couldn't see. We found that talking about it or acknowledging it made it worse. My mother came over for coffee and I was telling her about what was going on. At that very moment, a large cookbook flew off the shelf and onto the floor a few feet away. There was so much more, but I've tried to forget the whole experience. We decided to make contact with it. This was a bad idea. I looked up some YouTube videos. I won't go into what I did, but I blacked out. Middle of the day, broad daylight, and was sent to a hellish void. I could hear screaming and growling. I could smell smoke. It was like a near-death experience, but instead of a bright light, I saw hell. I know that sounds insane, and I thought so too. I went to the hospital to be obsessed, thinking I must be crazy or had a seizure or a brain tumor or something. Anything to explain what happened. I am 100% healthy and sane. No carbon monoxide poisoning, no nothing. Everything stopped. We did not talk about it for fear it would come back, and a year later we moved away. My youngest child knew nothing about what would happen and had just begun to talk. As we pulled into our new house, she cried and begged for us never to return to the old house again. She said it scared her. Nothing weird or creepy has happened to us since, and I've never gone back to our old home. We still own it, though. My family moved into a newly built home in a small town that my dad immediately insisted was haunted. None of us experienced anything important, since my mom had previously lived in a house she believed was haunted. My sister and me too, but we were too little to remember any of the events she says we experienced, so we waved Dad's concerns off. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, I'm around 25 at the time. We've got the house on the market and most of the family has moved out. I live there with a friend who needed a place to stay, and with my little brother staying there part-time, our 2 cats, and I've moved into the master bedroom. One night, I'm woken to the sound of my bedroom door cracking open. I usually leave it a little open so the cats can come and go. I figured it was just one of them, but as I roll over, I realize they're both in bed with me. So I look towards the door and see a humanoid shape slink into my room. I use the term literally. It was trying to stay quiet and keep a low profile. At first, I think it was my roommate. She, comes in once in a while. But then I remember she's not even home. The mind starts running fast. Little brother? No, he's not home either. Conclusion, I'm home alone and there's someone in my room. I start to get up and this figure starts clicking and gibbering at me. No words. My eyes are adjusting and I'm looking at this feral, hairy humanoid shape, about 4 feet tall. The best description I can give is goblinoid and naked. As I'm realizing I can't identify it, the thing fucking lunges at me. I defend myself with only option at hand, a super heavy blanket I sleep with. The creature has me on my back, pinned on my bed, and is just waiting on me. Scratches and punches. These scratches are running off the blanket, the heaviest, thickest blanket I've ever had. But I can feel the punches. I accidentally pulled the blanket over my head as I was still gripping it when I brought my arms up to protect my face. Here's the thing. I was bullied and left alone a lot as a kid. I overcame a lot of fear and loneliness. I had come to pride myself on my ability to handle threats and situations, and that included the unsubstantiated belief many of us develop that we'd handle a supernatural situation well. And I don't want to let myself down. Every monster has a weakness, and I don't want to let this one do whatever it's doing without a fight. I thrust both arms upwards and knock the creature off balance, then roll over to throw it off me. And as soon as I do, it disappears. I'm sitting up on my bed, sweating and breathing hard. My cats are awake now, looking at me like nothing's wrong. But I can still feel some of the harder hits that the creature dealt. Hell, I can smell it. The room is dark but dead silent, so after a moment, I bound out of bed and start turning the lights on. Nothing. I went through the whole damn house and I grabbed a knife in the kitchen. Nothing, no one. A dream, right? Well, here's the thing. 2, I'm a lucid dreamer. I know when I'm dreaming also. You know how a lot of people say they can't fight or throw punches in dreams? I can, but I take conscious effort. And I didn't feel any of that. It just did not feel like a dream. Still, that's the cleanest answer, right? Especially given my cat's lack of panic. Just a dream. I had convinced myself of that until a few years later, so I did not tell anyone about it, but my brother and I left the house before it was sold, so my sister moved in and was living there with her boyfriend and their friend. I did not learn about this until a few years after the house did sell, but they started hearing shit, including the clicking and gibberish of my feral goblin. This drew many, and I told you so from Dad. So to this day, 15 years later, I don't know. I'm not sure it was a dream. Midnight Monster here. That was 9 stories of extremely distressing paranormal activity that happened. Drop your thoughts and comments down below, and if you had a similar situation you would like to share, make sure you drop it in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel for daily videos.